Hello, welcome to video 5 of the EKG Detective. This episode we are going to be looking at atrial tachycardia. The EKG Detective is dedicated to helping people make the transition from using inductive logic to deductive logic. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the difference between the two, you can go back to video 1 where I spend some time talking about the differences between the two. Throughout this entire series, we are going to use two job aids. The first job aid is the EKG Detective Interpretation Checklist. The nice thing about this checklist is it really helps illustrate the mechanics of how deduction works. And if you're interested, just reach out to me at relevanceineducation.com and let me know that you would like a copy of the checklist, and I will make sure that I email one out to you so that you can use that as we go throughout this series. The second job aid that we are going to be using throughout this entire series is the EKG Detective phone app. It is available at the Apple Store and the Google Play Store. All you need to do is keyword search EKG Detective, and it will take you to where you can download a copy of the app. It's something that's not required, but it is a little bit easier to use in the aspect that it will more directly walk you through the process of deduction than the checklist will, but you by no means need to have a copy downloaded to work through this series. So the biggest question to ask is who can benefit from using EKG Detective? And the answer to that is anybody who is struggling with an ECG interpretation. The nice thing about this process is it allows you to focus on the waveforms and the things that you can see in the ECG, and you don't have to spend as much time focusing on the criteria within an ECG. Before we jump into looking at the ECG, let's take a few moments to talk about the electrophysiology of atrial tachycardia. So all normal beats originate from the SA node. And in the context of tachycardias, the SA node typically has a very difficult time sustaining rates above 100 beats per minute for long periods of time. It just isn't designed to be able to beat that fast for long sustained runs. It can actually get up into the mid to upper 100 beats per minute, but as I mentioned, it's not really intended to beat that fast. Whereas atrial foci don't typically tend to have those limitations. Atrial focuses will tend to beat much faster, and they aren't limited to that slower ventricular rate. So as a byproduct of that, when we look at a tachycardia that's originating from an atrial focus, it's typically going to beat somewhere between 150 to 250 beats per minute. But on certain occasions, it can actually beat faster than that. For those of you who are using the EKG Detective app, the first question that the app always asks is if the rhythm is regular or irregular. When we're looking at an atrial tachycardia, that rhythm is going to be regular because it's originating from a single focus. And most rhythms that do originate from a single focus tend to be regular. So since this rhythm is regular, we are going to go to the app, we are going to select regular, and then we will hit next to go to the next screen. Looking at the EKG Detective checklist, since the rhythm is regular, that means we can eliminate any of the rhythms that are irregular. And we can also get rid of ectopic beats because ectopic beats tend to cause a rhythm to be irregular. And since this rhythm is regular, there are not going to be any ectopic beats. The next question in the app is going to be asking what the rate is of the rhythm. And looking at our atrial tach here, we have about 18, actually we have 18 beats in this 6-second strip. So that means that our rate is running at 180 beats per minute. So we will go to the app. We're going to select 150 beats or greater, and then we will hit next to go to the next screen. For those of you who are using the EKG Detective checklist, since our rate is 180, that means we can go down the regular side and eliminate all of the rhythms that aren't going to be running 180 beats per minute. So that starts with sinus rhythm, sinus bradycardia, We can also get rid of sinus tachycardia because typically sinus tachycardias aren't going to have a sustained rate that's going to be greater than 150 beats per minute. And then from there, we can get rid of junctional rhythm, accelerated junctional, idioventricular, accelerated idioventricular, and sinus rhythms with a first degree heart block and Brady with a first degree heart block, because those rhythms aren't going to be that fast. The other rhythms typically aren't going to be that fast, but we aren't going to eliminate them just because of their rate. So going to the app, the third question it is going to ask you is, are there P waves that are associated with every QRS complex? Now that becomes a little bit of a challenge when we're talking about atrial tach, because when we're looking at a rhythm where the rate's not incredibly fast, we're going to have waveforms that are not obscured by anything. We can see really nice definable P waves here. We can also see very well definable T waves. So we're going to be able to see that we have P waves and T waves and they're nice and round. The problem that we run into when we have atrial tachycardia, and this is true with any tachycardia, is that many of the waveforms tend to get squished together and they combine together. So when we have a P wave and a T wave that combines together, what typically will happen is we are going to end up with a T wave that ends up with a sharp or pointy morphology. And that's due to the electrical activity of the P wave and the T wave getting combined together and basically ending up with a pointy waveform rather than a round waveform like T waves generally will be. You may actually see a P wave, but the waveform is going to be obscured again because it tends to get squished together with the T wave. But when we have a P wave that is obscured but present, that is going to be identified by an extra notch within the T wave. And that extra notch is the P wave that's being obscured by the T wave. So our two examples here are going to be our two most common examples when we have atrial activity. Is we're going to have pointy T waves where the T wave and P wave gets combined, or we're going to have an extra notch within the P wave, and that extra notch is actually going to be the obscured P wave. So when we look at our example, there are P waves that are associated. So with that, we are going to go to our app and we are going to select yes, and then we will hit next to go to the next screen. Now, for those of you who are using the app, that is going to take us directly to a supraventricular tachycardia, and an atrial tach is a form of a supraventricular tachycardia. The app isn't designed to delineate between the different types of supraventricular tachycardias in regards to atrial tach or junctional tach, so that's where we're going to stop with the app. But I would like to go back to the checklist, because the checklist is going to walk you through the criteria to determine if the rhythm is actually atrial or junctional in nature. So we're going to start with looking at the P wave criteria, and the first question that's going to be asked or looked at is if the P waves appear to be sawtooth and or are there flutter waves. So looking at our example of an atrial tach here, there are not flutter waves, because flutter waves are going to be extra P waves running basically adjacent to one another. They are pointy as we mentioned, but there are not any flutter or sawtooth P waves here. So going to our checklist, since there are not sawtooth or flutter waves, we'll be able to eliminate atrial flutter. Going to the next question in the checklist is going to ask if our P waves are discernible. So looking at our example of the atrial flutter right here, we do have discernible P waves because they are hidden in the T waves and we have that sharp pointy T waves. So since they are discernible, that means that we can actually get rid of ventricular tachycardia, because ventricular tachycardia is not going to have P waves or they're not going to be discernible because they aren't present. The next question in the P waves is if there are 3 or more different looking P waves. So when we look at our example here, all of our T waves that we can see all have the same morphology. So there are not 3 or more different looking P waves in this rhythm. There's only actually one P wave. So going to our checklist, since we don't have 3 or more P waves, that's going to allow us to eliminate wandering atrial pacemaker. The next question in the checklist is there more than one P wave for every QRS complex? So looking at our example of atrial flutter here, we don't have extra P waves. There's only one spiked T wave for every QRS complex. So that means that we don't have extra P waves. So going to our checklist, since we don't have extra P waves, that's going to allow us to eliminate all of the 3 heart blocks, type 2, third degree, proximal third degree, or distal third degree, because those rhythms actually have extra P waves. The last P wave question that's going to be asked is if the P wave is in front or after the QRS complex. So looking at our example of atrial flutter, we have P waves. They are hidden in or combined with the T wave, but they are actually in front of the QRS complex, because if they were after the QRS complex, they'd be immediately after the QRS complex. And these T waves, or at least these P waves that are hidden, are combined in the T wave, are actually after the QRS or before the QRS complex, excuse me. So with this, our P waves are in front of the QRS complex. With the P waves being in front or before the QRS complexes, we are not going to be able to eliminate our 3 remaining tachycardias based off of that one criteria. What we're going to have to look at is the PR intervals. So the last criteria we are going to be looking at within the CCG is going to be the PR intervals. Measuring the PR interval can be a bit of a challenge when we're looking at an atrial tachycardia, because the P waves and the T waves tend to get combined. But looking at our EKG, it appears that the P wave is starting right where the waveform tends to get a little bit narrower. So I'm going to measure it from that point where my bracket is. And measuring that point to the beginning of the QRS complex is measuring out at right at 0.16 seconds, about 4 boxes. So the PR interval with this rhythm appears to be normal. So looking at our EKG Detective checklist, that means that we are going to be able to get rid of a junctional tachycardia, because if it was a junctional tachycardia and the P wave was in front of the QRS complex, the PR interval would be short, and this PR interval is normal. And since it is normal, that means we can get rid of our sinus tachycardia. And that leaves us with the only remaining rhythm, which is the atrial tachycardia that we have basically been working from. All right, that brings us to the end of this episode. I just want to reiterate, if you would like to get a copy of the EKG Detective checklist, just reach out to me and I'll make sure that you get a copy of it. Also, if you have any questions about the EKG Detective phone app, you can reach out to me at relevanceineducation.com, and I would be more than happy to try to answer any questions or get you the resources that you need. And if you haven't done so, I would really appreciate if you would subscribe and like this video, because it definitely would help out as I'm trying to get this channel up and running. And I appreciate you for sitting through this video, and just remember that it is always better to practice as a clinician rather than a technician. See you next month.